Since Albert and his family moved closer, everything started to change. I never imagined that a seemingly stable relationship could be threatened by unwanted interference from his family. I always thought that being in love would bring peace, but now all I feel is tension and exhaustion. Am I being too difficult? Or is his family really trying to make me feel like an outsider? Since Albert and his family moved closer, everything gradually began to change. Our relationship, which was once stable and promising, now felt like it was being pulled in a different direction, one where every boundary I had set for myself was being crossed. At first, I didn't think much about his family living nearby. I thought, with a mature boyfriend like Albert, his family wouldn't have too much of an impact on our relationship. But when they actually started showing up, I realized how naive I had. Albert's sister, Sil, was the one who frequently came over without any prior notice. I'm not a particularly difficult person, and initially, I didn't see any problem with her coming to eat with us, especially when she brought her kids along. I understood that every family has their way of living, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. However, the visits kept happening and began to wear on me, making me lose my patience. One evening, when Albert went bowling with his friends, I just wanted a quiet night to myself. I had prepared a delicious seafood dinner with all my favorite dishes. After a long day of work, I felt like I deserved some time to unwind. But, as I sat down to eat, Sil showed up again, unannounced. She said she was just here to pick up her daughter's backpack that she had left behind. I was a bit irritated, but I got up to get it for her. However, what really frustrated me was when her son started demanding some of my seafood. I told him that it was my dinner and I couldn't share it, but he wouldn't stop and began crying uncontrollably. Sil just stood there, offering no intervention. Honestly, I tried my best to stay calm, but the way her son acted as if he had every right to touch my food was too much. I told Sil that my dinner was being ruined, and they needed to leave immediately. Yet they didn't leave right away. They lingered by the door, with her son still crying, while Sil just sat in her car, doing nothing to help. It made me feel watched and violated in my own home. When Albert came back, I could immediately tell by his expression that something was off. He said he was disgusted by how I treated his family and that he was extremely disappointed in me. At that moment, I felt like I was being criticized without a chance to explain myself. I had tried to love and accept his family, but it seemed that no matter how hard I tried, things weren't as simple as I thought. I was caught in a position where I had to choose between loving Albert and protecting my own sense of privacy and boundaries. After that uncomfortable evening, I felt even more stressed and exhausted by Sil's frequent visits. Although I tried to stay calm, her constant, unannounced appearances and her children's lack of discipline were becoming increasingly difficult to tolerate. I realized that, although I loved Albert, his tolerance and lack of concern for his family's actions were gradually making me feel like an outsider in my own home. Sil had a very particular parenting style. Her children, though generally well-behaved, were allowed to do pretty much anything without intervention or limits. The kids not only bothered us whenever they could, but also intruded into my personal space. Once, while I was working in my office, I discovered one of the kids had entered my room without permission. They had taken some of my belongings, including items I deeply cherished, like a collection of hotel toiletries. I spent hours searching for them, feeling violated and disrespected. Each time Sil visited, I grew increasingly anxious about the things around the house. I had to hide everything I valued, fearing the kids might take it. This became a routine for me, always worrying, always double-checking to make sure nothing was missing. But what really frustrated me was Sil's attitude. She never disciplined her children. Instead, she always found reasons to excuse their behavior. "They're just kids," she would say whenever I complained. One of the most frustrating incidents was when Sil's son, who has anxiety, had a small meltdown in the kitchen. He opened one of my drawers and grabbed a few poppets, small party toys I kept for fun. A few of them fell and popped loudly, and he became embarrassed, crying in distress. I chose not to console him because I knew that would just encourage his snooping behavior. I stayed silent, hoping he would calm down on his own. However, my lack of intervention only made the situation worse. Sael, instead of acknowledging the problem and correcting her son's behavior, just stood outside, doing nothing as he cried. I became increasingly irritated, realizing that I wasn't just dealing with unruly children, but also with Sil's lack of responsibility and her indifference to the situation. I asked Albert to talk to her, but I wasn't sure if he would do anything. All I got from him were more silent treatments and some passive-aggressive remarks. The tension between me and Albert's family was growing. I couldn't continue living in an environment where I felt disrespected and powerless. Every time Sael showed up, it felt like I had to prepare myself to defend my space, and it became an unbearable burden. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I could no longer endure living like this. Things became even more tense when I realized that Albert not only failed to intervene in his family's actions, but also seemed unaware of the serious issues I was facing with them. When I explained to him how uncomfortable and pressured I was feeling, instead of supporting me, he called me selfish and lacking compassion. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was the person I thought would understand and protect me during difficult times. But he was only defending his family, even though I had repeatedly asked him to respect my boundaries. Despite my efforts to explain and express my exhaustion, Albert continued to justify his sister's irresponsibility. He didn't see that his silence and inaction were making me feel abandoned. Even when I asked him to tell Sil not to show up unannounced, he remained quiet and did nothing. That silence made me feel isolated and unsupported. I began to feel like I wasn't just fighting with his family, but with him too. One day, after I had tried to explain everything as best as I could, Albert criticized me for the way I treated his family. He told me I didn't understand that they had their own struggles and that I only cared about myself. This made me feel like an outsider in my own relationship. I had been working tirelessly to support our life together, but it seemed like he didn't appreciate the sacrifices I was making. The lack of appreciation became more hurtful as time went on. While I was paying most of the bills and enduring the unfairness from his family, Albert didn't show any gratitude or recognition for my sacrifices. He was only concerned with pleasing his family, and all I received in return were accusations and silence. I began to question this relationship. Was I overreacting, or was it true that I wasn't getting the attention and respect I deserved? One of the most frustrating moments came when I asked Albert for some quiet time to relax. I told him that I needed a peaceful evening without any disturbances, but he didn't understand or support my request. He still allowed Sil to come over unannounced and then tried to blame me for not being patient with his family. I started to feel like I didn't have a place in this relationship anymore. Love didn't seem to be the only thing I was feeling anymore. Disappointment and being overshadowed by everyone else took its place. I didn't want this relationship to get worse, but it seemed like I had no other choice. The feeling of being abandoned and disrespected forced me to ask myself if this was a relationship I wanted to continue. As each day passed, I felt more and more distant from Albert. The loneliness in this relationship became more evident than ever before. I had tried so hard to understand him and his family, but all my efforts seemed to only receive silence or unreasonable criticism in return. Not only that, Albert's failure to respect the boundaries I had set with his family made me feel unsafe and unprotected. I felt abandoned, like an outsider in my own life. One evening after he came home, I decided it was time to confront him. I couldn't keep enduring in silence. The frustration had built up for too long, and I didn't want to be someone who just suffered quietly. I sat down and told him that I couldn't continue this relationship if things didn't change. I shared with him everything I had been going through, the feelings of being overshadowed and disrespected. I told him I couldn't keep living in an environment where I had to hide my emotions just to please his family. Albert didn't respond immediately. He just looked at me with a blank expression. After a long silence, he began to speak, but what he said made me feel like I was talking to a stranger. He told me I needed to understand that his family would always be important and that I couldn't expect him to choose between me and them. He said I was selfish for not accepting his family as part of our life. Hearing those words felt unbelievable because that was exactly what I had been doing all along, trying to accept his family, but they had crossed my boundaries. He also added that his family was always going through difficulties and I needed to empathize with them. This made me feel uneasy because I had already felt that I was sacrificing so much, and yet he didn't understand my feelings. This relationship seemed to only bring endless tension. I started to doubt that I could change anything. He would probably always stand by his family, and I would just be the one who had to give way. In the end, I made the decision that I had been contemplating for a while. I couldn't continue living like this. I couldn't stay in a relationship where I didn't feel respected or loved. Although this decision was very difficult, I knew it was the right one. I was exhausted and didn't want to endure it any longer. I told Albert that I needed to leave to find peace for myself, and that I could no longer continue this relationship. This was when I realized that I couldn't keep sacrificing everything for a relationship without mutual respect. When I left, though my heart ached, I knew it was the right decision for myself. After deciding to leave, I felt like my whole world had collapsed. Everything happened so quickly, and even though I knew I had made the right decision, I couldn't help but feel hurt and broken. The memories of the happy days with Albert were still fresh in my mind, but now they felt like a heavy burden on my heart. I knew I couldn't continue living in an environment filled with tension and lack of respect, but it wasn't easy to walk away from a relationship I had invested so much emotion into. The first day after leaving the house, I felt like I was being swept away in a whirlwind with no way out. I didn't know where to go or what to do, but fortunately, my best friend was there for me. She had always supported me throughout the past, and this time was no different. She helped me pack up my things and handle everything I needed to move quickly and efficiently. Knowing I had someone by my side made me feel a bit relieved. Although I was grateful for her help, a part of me wanted to be alone. I needed time to heal and process all the emotions that were weighing on me. I couldn't continue living under the pressure of Albert's family and their endless expectations. I needed to find myself again, to reclaim the independence I had lost over time. I moved into a hotel temporarily, where I could think clearly and not be disturbed. Still, the long, sleepless nights made the pain linger. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened, about how my relationship with Albert had deteriorated. I wondered if I had been too harsh. Had I missed an opportunity to salvage this relationship? But at that moment, I understood that I needed to stand firm for myself. I couldn't continue living in a relationship where I always felt overshadowed and disrespected. As time passed, I realized that changing my habits and mindset was the first step in finding peace again. I immediately started making plans for the next steps in my life. Changing my phone number and accounts was something I did right away. I knew I needed some personal space to not be affected by what had happened. Although this made me feel like I was walking away from everything, I understood that it was the right decision. I needed to take care of myself, and I couldn't let anyone at all, make me feel like I didn't deserve respect and love. I began looking for a new place to live, maybe a small apartment, or a new space where I could rebuild my life. Even though there were moments when I felt weak and lost, I knew I had made the right choice. I couldn't keep carrying a relationship where I was always the one sacrificing, while receiving nothing but pain and disappointment in return.